Welcome everyone, Mark Seljan again, and today we will explore a couple materials and how to work with them. So for that I'll need a simple scene and unit setup, centimeters, because we will use some lights, and those lights require some real life uh, values of units. We'll create a simple plane. This plane is set to a 100 centimeter by 100 centimeter, and now zooming in by pressing Z, move and right click to zero this out. This is actually nothing else, just a placeholder to make it easy. And if I press F9, this is the render that we have, but I don't really care about this model because this one is just a placeholder, so I don't want to make it visible in the rendering. To turn off renderability, there's many options. The option I like to use is whenever I'll have the item selected, right click object properties and turn off renderable. So from now on, when I'm pressing again F9 here, it's not rendered anymore. Okay, so again, it is just a placeholder object. Alright, now once we have this, this will guide us to create a small chunk of environment by creating a spline with lines, snap as turn on. We'll start it somewhere from here, move it to the back, lift this up, and create this shield top. So it's kind of a C shape, and this C shape will be extruded. So in this direction, this will be extruded, and as you see, we have quite enough room, well over 2 meters above our item, our little plane, because it requires some room. If you don't have enough, the light will be too strong. Of course, you can adjust it, but for real life conditions, it is quite advisable. If you have a small sphere to render, you need at least 1-2 meters distance to use a proper lighting. So okay, now once we have it, it's not there yet, so what we do need is to fillet these points here. So I'm going in, look for the fillet. Points are selected previously, and when the fillet is activated, now I can go in and use it. I'm holding down the left mouse button and dragging the mouse upwards, and as it is, I will stop before these 2 points in the middle reach. Okay, because if they reach, then that can cause an overlap. So this is what we have, and when I'm selecting this, as you see, we have 2 handles. So if these 2 points are too close, these handles can jiggle up the spline itself, so it could be a little bit ugly. Alright, another thing, we need more room here because this fillet was taking up some quite useful space, so I will drag this out even more. Camera will be somewhere here and we'll look inside to this kind of a C shape. Okay, now make it 3D. This one is just a 2D shape item. So line is selected, modify list, and extrude is what we need. Okay, the model is disappearing because it's not a line anymore, but it has no volume any kind, or has no surface at all because amount is 0. So don't be scared. We have it, but it's just not there. I will set it to 400. That's 4 meters. That's pretty much fine. And turning on wireframe will tell us that okay, this is quite nice, but we have no segments at all. So I will increase the segments, because if I want to bend this up a bit, that's a good idea to have some segments. Otherwise, you just cannot really do this bend. Okay, so you need to have some kind of segments. Now the reason I do the bend is if you have a spotlight and the spotlight is highlighting and facing to the camera, it can cause problems with the reflection. So if you have a flat surface, these areas might be highly reflective, and it could be quite a distracting phenomenon if you try to move the camera or anything. So it's easier if you just use a small bend to trick this item. Okay, now bend uses the pivot point as a reference, and the pivot point is by default is set to this uh, plane of the front view. And to handle that, we can opening up this band, select center and move the center away until the band just simply becomes evenly distributed. And when I'm done, I will just manually drag this back to the center, move it a little bit backwards. So there's a chance if you want to make it a little bit different, for example, a little bit wider, then it's cool to drag out the center, and this way now you have a kind of a half stadium as a lighting scene. Okay, now to make no problem with the overlap, I will drag this guy slightly. Now it's beneath the surface, but it's still visible in the wireframes. Okay, so it's just a good guide. All right, now move on. We need an item to start playing with, uh, and that will be a simple sphere. And this simple sphere will be created here. And the size is about 8 to 9 centimeters, so it's not that much. 9 centimeters fine. Now we'll just lift this up from the floor and set Shift F for save frame and set this environment. Okay, here's the nice gradient, so it will be pretty fun. It could be quite close, and I will use instantly the Shift C, Control C to create my camera, and F10 to open up render dialog. Rendering will be art renderer, and these are the same, and output size will be HDTV, and the best usual testing resolution is 800 by 450. Okay, now make some corrections, and as you see, it can cause a trouble if we have the camera target so far. So I will select the camera target and move it closer to the ball, lift it a little bit higher. Okay, right, so also lift this up a bit, select camera target is moved away to the side. Okay, this one is right. Now let's make a test. F9, physical camera view, and as you see, we have a highly reflective material. This is the default material, and of course we have the shadow because we are using the default scene lights, and art renderer utilize them and automatically cast shadows. Now the colors of the objects are from the original colors, so there's nothing fancy here. Okay, now before we are moving on, segments is way too low, so I will hit that to 50 to make sure that everything is nice and there's no segments visible here in the rendering. And it's time to use some materials. Now material editor is opened, and it's depending on the rendering algorithm. You have multiple options to pick a material. Now at the highest level here, if I click on standard, it will open up sample slots. These slots are the same as visible here, so I will close these. We have materials, and now these materials are really interesting, and because all these materials are depending on the rendering algorithm you pick. So if you are still with the scanline render, you know, this F10, so that's this one. So if you haven't switched the renderer, there's a chance, or you have another option, there's a chance you don't see these options. Now logic is the following. We have general materials, quite good. We have Autodesk materials, and we have the scanline standard. Now, all these materials that we previously used are scanline standard materials, but now we will switch to Autodesk and physical material. Now, physical material actually contains multiple sets and multiple adjustments to get results like this one, like metal, hardwood, ceramics, stones, etc. So imagine that this one as a container with multiple presets. Now these are generic presets for the typical stuff. So the results could be very similar, but it's much easier if you're using a physical material because you can switch internally. You don't really have to switch all the time the entire material. But now I will start with the generic one, double clicking on it, and this is the generic material, and I will use this generic material as a wall material. So that will be the wall, and this item will be renamed to wall. Okay, it's not that true, it's a gradient background, but anyway. Now dragged and dropped, and I will switch it to a little bit of a warmer color, so a warmer lighter gray. And there's no image, but here if you want to create and use a diffuse texture, this is the way to load a diffuse texture. Image fade is a combination of the actual color of the item and the map, so that's a mix between the two. And there's glossiness. You can use sliders if you want to create a highlight, or if you want to create a white um, reflective material. That you can use that one. Okay, now here's an environment. Now an environment is turned on. Okay, there's nothing really visible. Reflectivity, if you turn on enable, now you can add a reflectivity value, and you can also use glossiness. So if you want to use this glossiness, you actually have to turn on and enable reflectivity. Okay, so with highlights, you can reduce these highlights by clicking on and off. And you also have transparency. You can use maps for transparency. You can use cutouts for a complete opacity change. Self-illumination to add self-light. There's the bump effect. We already used ambient occlusion to create kind of a softened self-shadowing. And there is rounding corners, so if you have a kind of a technical rendering that you want to do, some kind of mechanical content, you can use this radius. This is quite a nice stuff. Okay, and roughly these are the basic settings. Actually, it's pretty close to a standard material. The classes are a little bit different, and in some cases it's easier to read than a standard material. And if you're just hovering over the cursor, it will tell you what is it for. Now I will turn off reflectivity because we really don't care about the reflectivity in this case, because it's a simple matte environment. So that's it. And for the next part, we'll use a standard physical material, opening it up. And this physical material will be dropped onto the sphere, and here are these are presets, and the preset I will pick is it will be a matte paint, so a matte surface that it's much closer to a skin-like surface. So it's a little bit glossy, but like a rubberish satin kind of finish. But yes, we have some glossy and satin varnish wood. We have glossy paint and satin paint separated. But I will just pick a matte one. So it's not 100% matte, but it's pretty close. I'm not really satisfied with this color, so we'll switch it to some kind of a warmer one, maybe just just greenish. Okay, that's a fun, positive, happy green. Now take a test. So Shift Q to render it out. Okay, wrong window active, so Shift Q. And this is quite nice. Okay, so there's no highlights. There's a soft highlight here on the ball because it's a matte surface. There's some self-reflection, and this is quite promising. Now my biggest problem is, and my biggest concern is the lighting, because we are still using the default lights, and to improve quality we definitely have to involve some other type of lighting. Now instead of using a sunlight that we did previously on in the house project, we will use a photometric light. Now I will turn this off, turn off the materials, and make sure that I'm in a top viewport. Okay, give some room to make it visible, and from the create we are looking for lights and photometric lights. By default these are turned on, and some positioner was here, but right now we need a target light. Target light, if you hit on target light, it will automatically ask you, yup, what you want. Do you want to create the camera, the physical camera exposure control? So this is important, this physical camera. And do you want to adjust the environment and effects dialog as well? And yes, hit on yes. It's good if you make it automatically, because we will use that control, we will use that effect later on. Okay, so I'm starting creating from the center of the light, holding down the left mouse button and dragging out the target, and when I'm satisfied with the positioning, and I'm just releasing the left mouse button, and here we go, this is what we have. Now it's a little bit weird, you have to manually drag and lift up the light, okay, but you have to take care. I'm sorry, I will change this from gray because it's so barely visible. Oh yeah, so I want to make sure that the light is somewhere under this kind of a shade, kind of a cover, because light can bounce from top to bottom, so light can reflect. It's targeted here and it can bounce a little bit around, and that can change the lighting qualities in a good way. So I will leave it as it is, and I want to make sure that the shadow will be visible here for the camera. So I'm going back, and nothing has changed. I've just created a light, everything is set to default, and I'm pressing Shift Q and take a look at what we have. Now I like the effects, I like how the light is affecting this bowl. There's the self shadow, there's some kind of reflection, there is a highlight that's going on here as the light reflects from the material to the shadow, and back and forth and back and forth, so it generates some close lighting. um, I don't really like the sharpness of the shadow, so I definitely want to change it. Now take a look. Um, we have this light selected, and don't forget, if it causes trouble to you to select light, camera, or anything like that, you can always press Shift G to turn off geometry, the display, Shift G again, and Shift L to turning off a light, Shift L. So once you have a light adjusted and you don't want to mess it up, you can actually easily hide it, so by Shift L. Or if you want to hide a camera, Shift C is to show hide the camera. Okay, now I'm selecting just the light and go into the modify panel and take a look what we have. Oh, surprisingly, shadows are not even turned on. So it's kind of a combination of a direction and the default shadow settings. So I will leave it as it is, but it's a good idea to turn on shadows. And the map type and the shadow type is advanced ray trace. Now advanced ray trace can create some bias in the shadows, can create some fades and nice effects. So I like to do that. It's not the fastest, but it's really gives a nice result when rendering. Now the rendering type is uniform spherical, and I will zoom in because when uniform spherical means you have a light source and it acts like some kind of an omnipotent light, so it directs everything from the point and distributes light evenly, but it's not real life. It's not real. So usually it's better if you just switch it to uniform diffuse, and uniform diffuse will instantly just snap this ball. And when you're zooming in, it's not really easy to see, but if you just switch in uniform diffuse, uniform spherical, this little sphere is actually jumping off. Okay, when you have the light selected, if you see that gizmo is actually not covering the center of the ball, then you just can recognize that you have the uniform diffuse um, contact now. Okay, so we have shadows turned on, we have advanced ray trace, we have uniform diffuse lighting. I don't want to change the intensity and color, but of course you can change the filters and everything like that. Intensity as it is, it's 1500 candela, and I'm not using dimming or anything, but here there is something to change. This is the emit light from shape option, and that emit light from shape is right now it's a point, but it's much better if we switch it to something else. For example, rectangle. Now we'll switch it to rectangle, and instantly it will just, wow, it's quite a huge, it's like a softbox. So imagine like a softbox or a window. Of course you can use line, you can use sphere, you can use cylinder. So it's a fun way to experiment with the different lighting. And but at this case, we're just keeping it at rectangle. Now, a small warning. If you want to create a glow effect, a lighting effect of some kind of a special lighting form, it's not the best way if you are using tens and dozens of lights. So if you want to make something to glow, then you can do it in the materials instead of using lights for that purpose. Alright, now going back to the camera, rectangle says set is to 50 and 50 somewhere, and shift Q to test the difference. And as you see, because we have now a surface area that emits the light, that rectangle type of light source, it blurs the shadow nicely. Okay, so it gives a better quality in the lighting. Let's take a look uh, at a little bit shinier material, because these kind of emitter surfaces are visible, so these can become visible if you have a bit more shiny material. Now I will close this rendering up, select the ball, and switching back to perspective, make a copy. Now let me check it here. Now this one is my camera view. I'm moving away with the camera, and material editor, and that was the matte material. Just let me quickly rename it. And now we are picking a different material, and this time try Autodesk Ceramics. So Autodesk Ceramics is a quite shiny material. It's a porcelain with a high gloss glazed finish. We don't have any bumps here or pattern or something similar, but it is just fine. Okay, and let me check it quickly. So this one's an active, shift Q, and voila, here we go. And as you see, the ceramic surface reflects the color here, and also reflects the shape of the light. And now that's it. So it's a different type of material. Of course you can use the physical material, but it's a good combination if you're using the Autodesk materials, the physical materials. Make some experiments with these. Autodesk materials are really easy to adjust. Practically, it's true for everything. Okay, now we are moving on and create some glass materials. Closing this one and making another sample sphere by using shift, dragging it out. Okay, just let me quickly create a new material, and that will be a physical material, and physical material will be glass. And as it is, from the choose presets, I will pick glass solid geometry. Okay, so for most of the glasses, if you have a volume that has a thickness, then you will use solid geometry. And if you want to switch to thin geometry, that is a single face material, so used in architecture or any kind of a window glasses, it could be used. Um, but I will switch to solid geometry because in many cases, if you want to create a figure holding a glass sphere or something similar, or just uh, really heavy and thick eyeglasses, you will use these solid geometry materials. So we'll switch it there, glass, and pick it, put it on the model, and just let me go to the perspective, and just we need some organization here. So this guy, put this behind a bit. We'll put this here. Okay, maybe the camera needs some angle and needs some distance to cover more. Okay, and I will move this guy to this site. Okay, now let's test the render. So Shift Q, testing it, check what we have. Okay, now it's pretty exciting. As you see, we have the reflection of this guy here. We have some kind of a transparent shadow because the light passes through this glass sphere, and we also have the highlight reflection that's coming from diffuse light. Now, in many cases, if you want to create good glass, you need a good environment, or you need some kind of volume change or some kind of a wall thickness. Now, this is a solid glass, and at the first sight, it's pretty much boring, in my opinion. Of course, we see the couple of reflections, but we can make it much more interesting if we add a shell modifier. So shell will give a wall thickness for this. Actually, not this amount, actually the opposite. So I will put an inside amount. It's a quite heavy wall thickness. And let me show the last rendering. So render frame window, I will make a copy, and this was a copy, and let me check the new render. So it is much more fun. So there's much more information about the environment. There's reflections going on inside, and as you see, we have this interesting shadow effect because there's a different density around the shell, and as the light passes through the inside, the cavity, the air, the shadows and the colors are also differ in this case. Now, but we have something that requires some attention, and that is the lighting environment. And the light environment is currently, it's just a simple black environment. Now, if you take a look at the environment panel, so rendering in environment panel, or by press 8, we have this background color black, and because this one is black, the environment what we did with the line, with the bent and extruded line, is not covering everything. So the rest of the environment is still showing the pure black color. Now I would change it to some kind of a mid-gray bluish environment, or something that's matching closer to this area. So maybe I can pick this one. That's right, probably lighter, so I will go in with here and render it again. Now make a copy and hit render, and something interesting will happen. We haven't modified the light, but we modified the environment, and as the environment changes, this whole environment effect can influence the overall lighting. Now there is no problem at all. We can quickly fix this by using the exposure control. So I'm rendering a preview that will actually create the same render in a small. Now it's an interactive render. So I have the luxury to come in, and the exposure value If it's lower down, I'm using the drag. Uh, as it's lower down, the quality of the render will change. So I'm sorry, the tone of the render will change. So I can dial back closer to the original one. But as you see, it also affects the shadows, some of the quality of the shadows. So it has its influence. Now, if you want back some contrast, you can use the environment settings here. For example, you can increase the highlights, and that will create more lighted surfaces. So here the highlights will be stronger. If you dial down the midtones, for example, uh, you can add more dynamics to the image, so the darks will be much more darker. And if you increase the shadows, that will also give back some shadow information. Now this was just with reducing the exposure value, and here I've changed many things. So by default, highlights are 1, midtones highlights are 0.2, midtones are 1, shadows are also small. So I will just hit render again, make a copy, and make a comparison. So now I have a much more dynamic image. Maybe it's too much, so I will reduce the highlights a bit and reduce the back up the midtones. Probably this one is not that cool. Yeah. Okay, render it again. Alright, now this will be fine with me. This will be fine with me. Just to change. Okay, that's better. I was missing this highlight area. It's barely visible now. So it's really barely visible now because of the noise. But it is there. Here's this highlight. So it is there. That's a good checkpoint. So if you cannot see the highlight as a separated full bright white, that suggests that you have too many highlight values added into the scene. Okay, but as you see, because of the change, the environment is not that black anymore. So every areas where that black environment was viewable, that it just affected the scene. And this is the first part. Second part will come. Thank you. Goodbye.